lowercase viewer@cspan.org. Our fax number is 202-737-3323. And if you'd like to send a card or letter, our mailing address is 400 North Capitol Street, Northwest, Suite 650, Washington, D.C. The zip code 20001.
Next, a discussion on crime, education, and the federal budget. A forum held today by Laszlo & Associates, a political consulting firm. This event runs about an hour and 10 minutes.
We're just waiting for one of our panelists, but she's right outside, so I'll get started in just a moment.
Diane, we'll try to take a pity. We'll let Jennifer pitch in for you.
No.
No? Okay, we won't.
Hello and welcome to our panel. I'm Jennifer Laszlo from Durham, North Carolina, and I'm a reporter and political columnist for the Daily Record in Angier and Benson and Dunn and Lillington and other parts. And I'm also the president and founder of Laszlo & Associates, a political training firm and event management firm. And I'm really, really excited to have our panel with us today. And I want to mention, actually, that this panel is the idea of a C-SPAN viewer who called me after a panel and said, why is it that there are so few women talking about politics on television? And really asked me to put together a panel of the best and brightest women in politics, and I am just really honored that each of you have joined me today. I'm really looking forward to this discussion, and want to introduce each of our panelists before we start with a couple of questions, and we will be taking questions from the audience here with us today. Our first panelist is Kim Alfano, who is a Republican media consultant. And I actually do want to mention, because last night I was watching Equal Time, and Mary Matlin was on talking about how there are so few women media consultants in the Republican Party, and she thought that there were none. Well, indeed, there is one. It's Kim Alfano, and she's terrific. Her clients are not only the governor of Oklahoma, but also Congressman J.C. Watts, and she is the winner of the 1994 Rising Star Award from Campaigns and Elections magazine. She is also a three-time Polly Award winner for her creativity and her effectiveness in media. Our second panelist, Kellyanne Fitzpatrick, who is not only a distinguished pollster, but she is also an attorney, had worked very, very much on the Contract with America. She also was a pollster working with Ronald Reagan and Jack Kemp. She's been featured recently by National Journal as one of Washington's most influential conservatives age 40 and younger. Our third panelist, and I think that we're out of alphabetical order, is April Lassiter, who is the Communications and Policy Advisor to Majority Whip Tom DeLay. And I do want to point out that she is speaking on her own behalf, not on behalf of the Congressman. Previously, she served the Honorable William R. Archer in the Bush administration for Empower America and the Family Research Council. She's also a weekly panelist on the television show Young Bloods, and has appeared on NET's American Family and Direct Line. Christine Matthews is the founder and president of CM Research. She formerly served as vice president of public opinion strategies, which is obviously one of America's largest polling firms, and I'm really excited that she broke out and started her own operation. Her past clients have included Senator William Cohn, the National Republican Senatorial Committee, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. She also serves on the board of Renew, which is the Republican network to elect women, and previously served the Republican Party of Indiana, where she was the party's campaign director for 105 mayoral candidates. Diane, who is our sole Democratic representative on the panel today, will be, I'm sure, holding her own quite effectively. She is the press secretary for the Democratic National Committee. Prior to that, she served as the press secretary to Senator Jim Sasser of Tennessee, and she was also the spokesperson for the Senate Budget Committee, so she knows an awful lot about the budget. She was also, in the past, the press secretary for Congressman Sandra Levin, director of public affairs for the National Federation of Business and Professional Women. Our final panelist, Ann Stone, who I'm sure you've all seen quite a bit on these panels and on C-SPAN and other television networks as well, is the founder and president of one of America's largest and most important direct mail fundraising outfits. She has worked on more than 300 political campaigns. Very, very, very effective fundraiser. She herself is a former candidate for public office and is active on several boards and nonprofits in Alexandria, Virginia. I'm going to start talking on this panel about crime. On last night's news, I was watching as they reported that violent crime in America has gone down. It has actually gone down by 5%. And this statistic shows that it has gone down 3 years in a row, which is ironic because people are so upset about crime, and obviously people feel very unsecure in their homes. Our nation has the highest incarceration rate of any industrialized nation. We currently have 1.2 million people serving prison sentences in America today at an average cost of $25,000 per prisoner. The prison population in our nation has doubled and redoubled again in the last 2 decades. And, ironically and unfortunately, our lawmakers have been inconsistent in how they've made our laws, so that the average murderer in our country serves only 6.5 years in jail, while the typical drug offender stays in jail for 17 years. Federal, state, local governments will spend $30 billion on corrections this year alone, and spending on prison construction has increased 612% from 1979 to 1990. I'm going to start talking about crime because obviously this is the most important issue to most Americans. And I'm going to start talking about it in the context of Oklahoma, where clearly one of the greatest crimes against people in our country was recently committed. Kim, you are the media consultant to the governor there. What is it like to be the leader of a state when a great tragedy such as this takes place, and how does a leader communicate about crime and security in such a time of crisis?
Well, I guess I can't really imagine what it would be like to be the leader. Obviously, that's not me, and at that point, you'd have to be Frank Keating to discuss that. But I'd say that what was really eye-opening about that bombing was that Frank Keating, when he ran for office, was so prepared. I mean, if you look at Frank Keating's background, he was an FBI agent, a U.S. attorney. He was, we said in our commercials, one of America's top cops. He had a background as a leader in the state Senate and the state House, and this huge occurrence happened, and this devastation happened in Oklahoma, and there he was. He kind of was poised and ready for it, in fact. I mean, if you could say that religiously maybe that God tests people, perhaps they test the ones that are prepared. And I think that that was what was most breathtaking about the way Oklahoma dealt with that situation. He was there. He was a leader. He spoke clearly, concisely. He knew exactly what needed to be done, when it needed to be done. His background came forward. He was really prepared to handle it, but not just Frank Keating, the entire state. The entire state just sort of leapt into action. They were telling me some stories about how, as they started to clean up after the bomb, that porta potties were just kind of showing up on the streets. Nobody knew where they came from. That boards, truckloads of boards showed up on the street from Home Depot and a bunch of different stores. Nobody paid for them. None of the money, the cost of plywood did not go up. And people boarded up windows, and things just started happening. It was kind of this, if ever there was a place that was prepared for something like that, if you could ever be prepared for something like that, it was Oklahoma. And I think leadership in that situation and how you deal with media and how you speak to people is just, I think, through honesty and confidence. And there is no one who is more honest or more confident than Frank Keating. He just really knew what he was doing, knew what he had to do, pulled back down into his soul and found, his moral fiber and said, we need to hold hands, get together, pray a lot, and make things happen. And we need to do it for the sake of the family. So I think he handled it honestly and almost almost innately, you know, and maybe if it was someone else, they wouldn't have been prepared. The lesson I gathered from that was you darn well better know who your candidates are, because never had I thought in my 2 biggest races as a, you know, as a sort of novice media consultant that they'd be tested so dramatically. And I thank God that they were so prepared. You know, I don't know, I could not imagine watching television and seeing those guys if I had thought they weren't up to the standard. And they really did a fantastic job. It was a great lesson as a new media consultant.
Ann?
I was going to say, Kim, I think you pointed out something that goes to the heart of crime in this country and why perhaps places like Oklahoma don't have as high a crime rate as some of the urban areas, and really something that is at the heart of how we solve the crime problem in this country. Think about what you said about how people leapt into action, about how things appeared as if, you know, from nowhere. People pulled together. That was an example of a community that was attached, okay? People attached to each other, people acting, neighbors helping neighbors. And think about so many areas of this country where people are not attached to their communities, where they're detached. And no offense to the media present here, but I think a lot of it does speak to the problems created out of the media and out of the fact that we all have these electronic boxes in our homes, and we've become detached from each other. We don't have to get out into our community to participate anymore. We participate with a box. We don't have to get out into our community to find out what's going on. We can turn on the television at night and find out. And I think that has, over the years, this medium has helped detach people and keep people from being as much a part of the community as they used to be. Unlike Oklahoma, that is not typical all over the country. It is in some of the more rural areas. But this is something I think we need to do more of, is to find the secret of the people of Oklahoma and how they stay attached to their community and try to replicate this. And I think only then are we really going to get at the base cause of crime, and all the other things we do, incarceration et al., is only going to be treating the symptoms and not treating the root cause of why crime continues to be a problem in this country.
Kellyanne, I see you wanted to jump in, and then I'm going to turn to the other side because I want to hear from everyone on this topic.
It's a very important topic, and I think my colleagues to the left and the right of me touch upon, from a polling perspective, what is very significant about crime. Oklahoma City, the tragedy in Oklahoma City is probably the large-scale exemplification of how Americans really perceive the crime problem in this country. It's a very personal issue, and that's why statistics like violent crime has decreased 5% for the 3rd year in a row don't hold much water in many of our rural communities, in many of the places where communities are attached to each other, because those are statistics about a systematic issue. And people, when they think of crime, they're not concerned about crime as a system issue. And many politicians and many office holders and many people in our respective industries do misplay the issue that way. Crime is a matter of personal security. And the crime bill of 1994 will ultimately fail individual by individual in their minds for the same reason it was unpopular at the time it was being debated. And that's because it didn't reach out to someone as an individual and say, I'm going to make you feel safer in your home, in your schools, and in your workplace. It talked about prison reforms, which many people don't believe even exist in there. It talked about midnight basketball and arts and crafts. And if in August of this year, the 1-year anniversary of President Clinton signing the crime bill, if you can't answer the question in the affirmative that you feel safer, the crime bill means nothing to you as a personal issue. It's not about system, it's about individual security.
Diane, the president's numbers, or his poll numbers, went up significantly after the Oklahoma bombing because of the way in which he responded to that. How have you looked at the DNC at communicating on crime and security issues overall?
Well, as Kim spoke about, the important issue here was leadership, and the governor of Oklahoma did show excellent leadership, as did President Clinton. And I think one of the things that Americans like to see is a Republican and Democrat, in that case, working together to help the people and to bring aid in and to rebuild the devastated community. It was a horrible, horrible tragedy, and it was perpetrated against the federal government, according to newspaper reports. And I think it's important to kind of break that down and look at What is the federal government but the woman whose child is in a daycare center, who's doing her job and helping seniors get their Medicare benefits, or another federal worker who's helping a veteran get their veterans benefits? I think it's important to look at the human face of this tragedy, and I think if anything possibly good can come out of it, it is a discussion about where we are in this country in terms of crime and fighting crime, and what causes this kind of terrible event to occur. And I think one of the things that we have to look at, and I think the President spoke very eloquently about this, was that the hateful speech that goes on in this country on talk radio and in other places. And I think that fuels this kind of activity. So I think that the tragedy in Oklahoma sparked a discussion about this, and I think that'll be useful for the country. I wanted to make one other point about the crime bill. It was a significant piece of legislation passed at the end of the '94 congressional session. And the crime bill contained a lot of important provisions in it, and I think that there was a lot of talk about midnight basketball, which President Bush actually endorsed as a point of light when he was president. But the crime bill contained a 3 strikes and you're out provision. It contained money for building new prisons. It contained a provision to put 100,000 new police officers on the street. I think there's nothing that can go further toward people's feeling about their own personal safety is to see police officers actually on the streets patrolling in neighborhoods. So there were a lot of very important things in the crime bill. The Violence Against Women Act was also in the crime bill. And so I think it's easy to kind of sort of write it off and say, oh, this was pork. But if you really take a close look at it, there were a lot of important programs in the crime bill that will help people feel safer in their homes and in their neighborhoods and in their communities.
April, when you take a look at the crime issue and legislation is moving, and then you have a whole conversation about the National Rifle Association, how do you take a look at some of the gun legislation vis-a-vis crime and really talk about security?
Well, the issues are definitely related, Jennifer. The 1994 crime bill was definitely filled with pork. I'll affectionately disagree with my neighbor here. The midnight basketball that President Bush endorsed as a point of light was actually privately funded. Certainly we do need privately funded involvement in our communities. The breakdown of the community can be directly related to this sense of fear about crime and about gun-related violence. But I think the crime issue is very similar to the gun issue in that it's really based on, as Kellyanne was saying, how people feel. Robert Samuelson did a wonderful article last year called The Triumph of Psychofact, in which he explained that it doesn't matter what is true, it matters what people feel is true. If people feel that guns are a problem, then they're going to be anti-gun, and yet there's no evidence to show that stricter gun control laws make our country any safer. As we know, living in the murder capital of the world here, we have the strictest gun control laws in Washington, D.C. anywhere, and we haven't seen any benefits from that. As far as the crime bill, in '94, as opposed to the crime bill that was passed in the contract with America, I think what the Congress is saying in response to what the people are saying are, we know in our localities, in our communities, in our states, how we need to deal with our crime issue. Some people don't need more police on the streets. Some people need fax machines. Some people need more cars for their policemen. What we're trying to do, and this is consistent with the general philosophy and with the contract with America, is to say, you know best how to spend the money. We're not going to tell you that you in your community need more arts and crafts or that you need more police necessarily. We want to free you up to evaluate your needs and be responsive to that specific community.
Actually, the news, interestingly enough, said, much to the surprise of many, that the murder rate in the District of Columbia was down 17% this year over last year. But it's very clear that the perception that people have about security doesn't reflect their feeling that they're 17% less likely to get murdered in the District of Columbia this year than last year, so I hear exactly what you're saying. Christine, I'd like to ask you, as a pollster who listens to a lot of, focus groups and a lot of the answers to surveys, how you talk to candidates about conveying really a sense of security, and how you ask them to then implement what they have promised through their legislation.
What I'd like to do first is go to a different point of departure. As I was hearing all the debate on the whole issue of crime, I think it's really important that we not try and extract the issue of crime from the whole kind of larger issue of the moral and cultural decline and the decline in values. I mean, we're seeing that people are very, very concerned about that type of issue, and crime, I think, should be effectively viewed in that context, because perception is everything. And even though crime actually is decreasing, what we're seeing, as Ann discussed, on the medium that we're watching every night, the television, is we're seeing violent crime. We're seeing horrible things happening in society, the Oklahoma City bombing, all sorts of kind of atrocious crimes. And I think that you can say factually, crime is actually decreasing, but there is a very strong sense that within that context, the moral fiber is really absolutely unraveling. And so you can do specific, you can address the specific crime issue, you can build more prisons, you can put more police on the street, but and so people are supportive of that. I mean, obviously throw something at it, do something, but until you absolutely address kind of the larger issue of why is our society behaving like this, what's wrong, why aren't we treating each other with respect, then I think that you're not going to be able to find any kind of solution to the crime issue until you kind of talk about it within that larger context.
Obviously, we can talk about crime forever, but I want to move on to our next topic quickly, which is...
Can I jump in and
sure,
just say one more final thing about
Here,
crime?
take this one.
Okay. There's a debate going on whether the federal government should be funding 100,000 new police officers, or whether that money should be just turned over to the states to do as they wish. I just want to respond to what was said earlier and say that I think people are going to feel more safer if there are more police on the street than if there are more fax machines in the offices. I think that goes a long way toward people's perception about crime and their own safety, as well as the reality of how safe they and their families are on their streets. So we, the Democrats, are trying to protect that provision in the crime bill, because we see that as one of the most important aspects of fighting crime. Thanks.
We're going to move on to education, because also on the news they said that the SAT scores, the average SAT scores in our country, have gone up 100 points, 100 points per child, but unfortunately that's because they're grading easier than ever. They have started to grade upwards to give people an easier advantage, because unfortunately our SAT scores have dropped so dramatically. So I want to ask our panelists to really address the education issue, because you don't hear politicians or elected officials talking, or at least as much as I would be interested in hearing, about education at all. What should be done, what can be done, what will be done. Let's actually start with Christine, because I know you've done some work on some of the vouchers and whatnot in the past, or different kinds of initiatives and different ways of looking at how to solve the the education problem, which obviously seems to be linked to some extent to the crime problem, in terms of people without a good education really don't have much of a future.
I think education is a lot like government. People are willing to pay more money if they feel like they're going to get a good payoff or have a good investment on their services. But what they're finding is that they're not having a very good investment in terms of their tax dollars that are going to education. I mean, the outcomes are, as you discussed, I mean, the SAT scores are lower. New businesses are saying that people who graduate even from college aren't able to write effectively, communicate effectively, and so we're really not having the kind of outcomes that we want. I have not actually done a lot of polling on this particular issue, but I mean, I think that certainly this is a very key issue. Next to crime, the public supports more being done for education. I mean, you see it. I mean, more money for crime, more money for education. This is a very big concern. This is a very big concern, especially for women, especially for Republican women. And I think the Republicans need to communicate a little bit better to Republican women and all women on this issue on education. So,
April?
Well, it's an interesting topic in light of the fact that our budget resolution eliminates or at least consolidates the Department of Education. I'd be curious to know if anyone can, any of our viewers really know what the Department of Education does. I had to do some research on that for myself. Certainly, the Department of Education is very similar to the federal government. When you talk about taking taxpayer money and sending it up through levels of bureaucracy and sending it back to the schools, you're always getting, I think, less of a return for your investment, especially when we know that school systems are most effective when they are locally controlled. And so I think that the Republicans are talking about, again, returning local control to the school communities. I think part of the reason that education has not fared better over the past, I guess, 20 years since we saw A Nation at Risk published is that families, again, are less involved in the schooling system. We are seeing a breakdown of the community. We don't have parents coming to PTA meetings or tracking their children's progress in schools. And as a result, the schools are overburdened. I mean, we have psychologists in schools now. We have school-based clinics handing out condoms in schools. We have the school system trying to take over the role that the family once did. And that simply will not be a successful endeavor.
Diane?
I agree with much of what's been said so far, that education, excuse me, is a terribly important issue to people across this country. It affects their income levels, it affects their families' economic stability, and our goal should be to make our educational system as strong as it can be and make it as effective and available to as many people, especially higher education, with respect to access. I think it's important to note that we are in a major fight these days about what kind of federal spending is going to occur with respect to education. The Republicans would like to cut back 1/3 of the funding, the federal funding that's spent on education. Now, this is not just a matter of cutting some faceless bureaucrats out of the education department. What we're talking about here are proposed cuts in Head Start, in school lunches, in programs to bring computers and educational technology to schools, in programs that help disabled students. And ironically, we were just talking about crime. The Republicans want to cut programs to make schools safe and drug-free. You know, there's a very real difference of opinion. I think most people do agree that education historically and continues to be a more locally, should be run by local and state officials rather than federal government. But I think that there is a role for the federal government, and I think when you talk about making draconian cuts in student loans and making college much less available for students, I think you're going to see a big outcry across this country that this isn't the way the country wants to go.
Can I respond to that briefly?
Or I'll respond.
Actually,
Okay.
let me wait till
Sure.
give Ann a chance first.
I think it was Newt Gingrich that said only in Washington can an spending increase be called a cut. In fact, the Republicans are cutting the rate of increase, but all the budgets on education are going up. And also block grants are being called cuts, but they aren't. It's just turning it back to the local areas where it can be spent better. But I want to take a little different tack, because when I was a candidate for mayor of Alexandria, Virginia, I learned a lot about the way education shouldn't happen. And Alexandria, for those of you who don't know, spends over $9,000 per student in public education. We had the highest spending rate in the state and the lowest for it, the lowest scores for it. And in looking at it and looking at what is the problem here, it became readily apparent that more money for education is definitely not the answer in this country. That is not the problem. In most areas of the country, we are spending a tremendous amount on our students. The problem is the allocation of the money. We're getting away from basics. Money's being taken out of the basics of reading, writing, arithmetic, and put into other areas and into administration. There's many more levels of bureaucracy in the school systems, even at the local level, than we used to have. Another biggie, and this has nothing to do with money, we have lowered our expectations. You know, you touched on it in the fact that the scoring for SATs has gotten easier, but it's even more than that. It is really very sad, especially for the most disadvantaged students. The expectations for those students has been dramatically lowered. In Alexandria, I had occasion to be visited by a school board member who was very angry that I was criticizing the school system and the way money was being spent. And he came to visit and threw a journal at me that this child had written. He said, "Read this and you'll understand what the problem is. You just don't understand what these teachers are dealing with." So I read the story, and the story was written by this child. His name is Jose, and he wrote, "My name is Jose so-and-so, and my daddy's name is so-and-so. Daddy, we want to thank you for a wonderful Christmas. We had presents, we had a tree, we had a wonderful dinner. Thank you very much." And then it went on to say, "My daddy is not with us anymore. He's gone to Jesus. But Daddy, Mom and I want you to know we thank you very much for a wonderful Christmas." And I read the story, and I said, "Yeah." He said, see, that's what they have to deal with." I said, "Excuse me, what?" "Well, his father OD'd after Christmas." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, that's what they have to deal with." I said, wait. Are you saying there's a problem with this child? He has wonderful memories about his father. He clearly has come through a trauma with his head on straight, and he's got a wonderful optimistic attitude about everything. Are you saying there's a problem?" I said, "I'll tell you, you're the problem. You've got a cultural bias." And what I found when I looked into it, especially in our local area, was people had a very paternalistic towards the disadvantaged in the system, had lowered expectations, and had the feeling of, oh, these poor things, they're never quite going to be able to do it, so we'll have to take care of them and make allowances. And I heard from teachers within the system that, a lot of the teachers didn't have tough enough standards, and they weren't holding the kids to higher standards. And that alone is a problem. There was a great editorial, truly a landmark editorial in the Wall Street Journal earlier this week, talking about Asian students and looking at Berkeley, because there's a controversy because there's such a high percentage of Asians as opposed to other different ethnic classes. And they said, why is this that they're excelling and being accepted at such a high rate? And they talked about parents, and they talked about the fact that in the Asian culture, and even after they've been in this country for several generations, within their culture, they hold their children to an extremely high standard. The parents are very engaged in what they're doing, and they expect a lot, and they get a lot. It isn't a matter of their brains are different and somehow they function better. It is a matter in their community, education is put first, and we see that in other cultures as well. And I'll tell you, if we want to be competitive, we've got to reinstill that in all of the different ethnic groups that make up this American culture. And that's how you're going to restore education in this country, not with more money. We've got to start more basic than that. Individual responsibility.
Kellyanne, what do you think the role of the federal government should be in education and in raising standards for education?
I'll speak as a pollster. I'll tell you what Americans are thinking on that, and actually have done a significant amount of polling on education and polling and focus groups, for that matter, on education and school choice and the like. And what's interesting as a pollster is education may be among the most fascinating issues with which I deal, but also one of the most frustrating to communicate to elected officials or to policymakers who are interested to know what the public opinion background on education is. And the answer is twofold. The first is, at a time when people are looking for a streamlined federal government, there is a slim majority of support for abolishing the Department of Education. And that is because many people are not looking at just the style, the term, the form Department of Education, looking at the function, and they don't like what they see there, or at least they feel confused. They say, well, Johnny's fourth grade teacher is okay, my kids are getting good grades. What is this Federal Department of Education in Washington, D.C., which I hate for every other reason, in Washington, and I visited once on a bus tour. So they believe that education is a very local, not even state as much as local issue. That when you are dealing with the children of this country, you've got to have the closest proximity to the decision makers as you possibly can. And what's happening is parents and teachers are pointing the fingers at each other. And of the PTA, which once was a mainstay in our society, I think the association part, the A of the PTA, is really what's missing now, that parents and teachers are not bound together in working for children. Education as a polling issue is a sleeper concern. It's a sleeper issue, and what I mean by that is, if you ask top-of-the-mind responses, what is the #1 problem facing this country today, people quickly talk about crime or the economy or, for a while last year, health care, whatever they're hearing on the news pretty much. There isn't a lot of press coverage on education as a frontline story, if you haven't noticed. But when you ask people, you give them either a series of 5 issues, and education is one of them. You say, I'm now going to read you a list of issues. Which one do you believe should be top priority for President Clinton in the Congress? And if you say some of those top ones that come out top of my response, health care, welfare, crime, the economy, but you add education in there, education almost always peaks at between 28 and 31%. So it's when you're reminding people education is an important issue, they immediately latch onto it. A better example of that research-wise is I cannot walk into a focus group of any type of cross-section of America today designed to talk about any issue without hearing about education in the first 2 to 3 minutes. Whenever I start talking in general terms of what's on your mind, what do you think Washington can do better, what is your #1 concern locally, what is your #1 concern nationally, I always hear about education because, Jennifer, and you touched on this, education is viewed as both the lack of education and the lack of priority that we all give it as a nation is viewed as symptomatic of all the problems, but it's also viewed as the best solution. That better education, if we invest in our youth as resource and stop using them as a sort of media ploys between are we cutting Head Start, are we cutting school lunches, if we really concentrate on our children and the value that they have and the future that they give us, then education, in fact, is a very important issue. There's a real pro-family climate in the Congress now that has led to a lot of good pieces of legislation that have both been passed as part of the contract with America and that are currently being marked up and debated. And this pro-family climate is a perfect one to reintroduce education as a tremendous priority. School choice vouchers are very popular, even though Prop 174 failed 2-1 in California. That was really, and I'll defer to our media expert, it was really a media success. It was a public relations coup. As an issue, school choice vouchers are a big home run, particularly with parents who feel that at last they'll be granted more control over what their children are reading, where they're going to school, who their teachers are. And school choice vouchers equal control. That's the same reason people want education defederalized and brought down to the local level. It's the same reason people like medical savings accounts for health care or Medicare, because it's about personal control over what you're doing, what you're spending, and ultimately what your children are reading. In most states in this country right now, parents are not made privy. They do not have a right to have access to the library books their children have taken out of a library. There's something wrong with that.
I'm going to get to probably something along the lines of what Ann said, which was she touched at the very end on personal responsibility. I think it's a question of discipline. Education, I don't know if anybody saw Day One last night, but there was this great 5-minute package on how in North Carolina and in South Carolina they're taking the problem children out of schools and removing them from classrooms and putting them in special classrooms and letting kids learn again. And what was interesting about that, it's not a study by far, but what was interesting about that was the kids that were left were saying, it was nice, my grades went up, it was nice to be able to hear myself think, it was nice to be able to study. Yeah, I'll tell on a kid because I want my classroom to be like it was. Somebody paid attention to them, paid attention to what they needed, and took care of it. It didn't take any more money to do it. Throwing money at a kid doesn't help that child get what he wants. What he wants is to be able to learn. What we do is we have these great lobbyists, and we have these great unions, and we have these great bureaucrats, and all of them are getting a ton of money, but that's not getting to our kids. It's not sitting down with them, addressing what they need, and finding out how we can better teach them. It's a matter of discipline on the part of the students and teaching them personal responsibility, but it's a matter of disciplining the government as well and teaching us that money doesn't solve a problem. When I worked with Bill Brock in his primary, I got to go down into the worst city in Baltimore, the worst area in Baltimore, and talk to a couple of kids at about 5 kids at a high school, which is considered the most dangerous in the area. And they're in a program called the National Academy Foundation. It's a school within a school. It's something Bill Brock and American Express, Bill Brock was sort of the president of it, and American Express had put together, not paid for by the government. It's a school where these kids had learned the values and education of the law. They knew inside and out the law. They were debating court cases. They were sitting there. These are kids that are supposedly lost to the education system. They were talking about RIFs and tariffs and things that I couldn't understand because they had been given the opportunity. They were told, you can be in this program, we'll give you this higher education. There was another one that debated the stock market, and they had actually predicted the stock market successfully for a year, and that was their job. I can't balance my checkbook. These kids were able to pick, mutual funds and stocks that would be successful. The reason was somebody went down and paid attention to them. Somebody pulled them out and said, we'll give you this opportunity. The rules are, you have to come to school in a suit. You have to stay after school for 4 extra hours a day. You have to be disciplined. You can't miss one class. They had rules. If they didn't get the rules, they were out. We asked these kids, why do you do it? It seems really hard. And they said, because I'm going to make something of myself. Well, everybody forgets you. You're going to, we'll just give you more money and you can go to the regular classes. No, we want some discipline. We like the discipline aspect of it. I'm learning something. And the most eloquent moment was when I asked one of the little girls, Dee Dee, who said, every morning when I get up, I hug my mother because I'm not sure if I'm going to see her at the end of the day. That's how dangerous it is where we live. But every day when I go into class, I think that's not the way it's going to be with my kid. This little girl has no money. This little girl has no sort of hope if you look at the federal government tossing money at her, but where she got her hope was that she was disciplined. She was given an opportunity in school and it didn't come from the government. And she can see a way out. That's a way to approach things. We just get really lazy. We think that if we send money down, everything's going to be okay, but as I left, the little girl said to me, and 2 of them said to me, well, would you tell Mr. Brock that we'd really like to meet him? We don't want you to come down here in a political cycle, take our picture, put us on TV, and then forget about us. And I regaled this to Bill Brock, and he got in his car and drove down there and sat with them for 2.5 hours and talked with them and stays in touch with them to this day. The point was they didn't want us to send money. They didn't want us to send programs. They wanted us to pay attention. And paying attention requires discipline and time. And those are things you can't buy. Those are things you don't get from education bureaucrats. Those are things the teachers' unions aren't spending time on. You need to spend more time and more energy. It doesn't cost anything more.
Actually, Diane, I think you wanted to respond quickly.
Thank you. Many of those things I agree with, that it is important to spend more time, and there are a lot of things we need to do to improve our educational system. But the fact of the matter is, if you want to go to college in this country, it costs money, and it costs a lot of money. And where are you going to go to be able to afford that? Most people turn to the federal government to get some kind of a student loan. If the Republican budget proposals go into effect, each student could be paying as much as $4,900 in addition to what they're paying now for those that are dependent upon student loans. And I think it's one thing to say, oh, the federal government shouldn't be involved in education and don't throw money at this problem. That's not the solution. But the fact of the matter is, if you want to go to college, you're going to need a student loan. For most people, that's the case, and they turn to the federal government for that.
Could I just wait?
Actually, I think everyone could once again comment again, but we're going to move on quickly so that we can get to the audience. But I'm going to take a moderator's prerogative just to say 2 things. One is someone had mentioned the programs to help the disabled, which interestingly for myself personally, when I was a student myself, I was in a serious car accident, and I spent most of a year in a wheelchair. And for me, the biggest education issue that the government ever did for me in my entire life was to make rooms handicap accessible so that I could get to class when I was in a wheelchair. And unfortunately, most of the buildings were so old that I couldn't even get into my class. And I remember as a student very, very well what it was like to go to midterm exams in my wheelchair, having not been to a single class for that course, not even one class, the entire up until the midterm, because I literally, physically could not get into the building. And that for me, that's a very, very important, but not expensive, and not within the education department budget thing that you can do for students to make them have an ability to learn. So the whole dynamics and the interplay of education, I mean, Ann was talking about what the students have to deal with and what the teachers have to deal with. I mean, one of the things that people can do to help education be better is since 1 out of 3 families, 1 out of 3 families in my state at least, deal with deadbeats who aren't paying child support. And when they have no income coming in at the home and they're so struggling to make it, and the kids don't have enough food in their bellies or quite the clothes that they wanted to wear so that they wouldn't be made fun of in school, that it's harder for that student to concentrate because maybe that mother at home is working a second or third job and can't be at home with that mother to help with that child, to help with the homework. That these are the sorts of issues that no matter what you do in politics, there is nothing that exists in a vacuum. It is all an interplay between the crime and between the education and between whatever we do to make people's lives better, which is how we're going to move on to our next topic, which is the overall biggest thing, because there is nothing that you can do in the government without some money to pay for it somehow. And I was taught early in life that you can tell what a person's priorities are by looking at their wallet. And, you know, there are a lot of people that used to tease because people would say, oh, I care about the environment, or I care about women's issues, or I care about my religious institution. And I remember my parents saying to me, well, have they given to them? Is there a check stub in their checkbook that shows they have donated to that cause? Because so often people are very big on talk and less good about actual giving, even in their own personal lives, not to mention the government. So I want to turn directly to the budget, and this is my last question for the panelists because I very much want the audience to have a chance to ask questions. April, I'm going to ask you because I know you've been working hard on the budget issues. What is it that you see as the ultimate goal of this budget, and how do you think it will affect our families?
Well, I think the ultimate goal of this budget is that the federal government would stop mortgaging our children's future. Spending has been out of control for the past 40 years, and we've seen what was originally good-intentioned programs such as the welfare system become not a trampoline for people to springboard into productive life, but rather, I've heard a lot of people refer to it as a hammock. I think that our general philosophy in Congress in trying to develop goals for the budget is asking some very basic questions. Are the programs that are here still useful? Are they duplicative? And are they wasteful? And we've gone through line by line, item by item, and looked at every program and reevaluated setting priorities. One comment I wanted to make, in addition to what you said, is while it's true that you can tell what a person's priorities are by the way they spend their money, you can also tell what their priorities are by the way they spend their time. And I think that one of the unique considerations we have at a federal level in considering budgetary matters is what is the role of the federal government. In some cases, there may be very important priorities that need to be addressed on a state level. And so you can't look at the federal government and say this is, you know, that if there are some things missing, that it's not a priority. It's just that we think that state and local lawmakers are better able to determine where those funds go.
Chris?
I think the budget's going to be a very interesting issue for a number of reasons, but I think a larger issue is it's the chance for us to draw a line in the sand about the role of government and to have a larger debate about what's the proper role of government. And I think the Republicans are saying, you know, let's scale this back. It's become unwieldy and it's become unresponsive. President Clinton, I understand, is getting ready to release a budget this month or next month, and he has an opportunity to enter that debate about the role of government. I mean, he may choose not to do that. He may choose to say, item by item, I'm going to fight you on these issues. And I actually think that that's lacking courage. And I think the Republicans have had the uncommon courage to say, look, everything's on the table. I think the Medicare issue is a very good illustration of this. I mean, when you look at polls, obviously people are very concerned about the deficit. They want to reduce the deficit. But Medicare and Social Security are the sacred pillars. I mean, they don't want to reduce the deficit if you have to touch Medicare or Social Security. And I think the Republicans have had the uncommon courage to say, look, let's face reality here. By the year 2002, whether we do something or not, Medicare is going to be bunk. We're going to have some serious problems, and I think it's irresponsible to not address that. Now, obviously, nobody wants to take on seniors in this country, but I don't know that this is going to happen, but I think we need to have a debate on this, and I think, as you said, we need to talk about it in terms of you know, everyone's got to give something here, and it's our children. And I think Republicans need to do a better job of becoming a little less academic about this issue and a little more real. I mean, every issue, crime, education, even the budget, has the potential to be much more powerful if it's cast in a more real and personal way. And, you know, I think we can say to our seniors, we respect you, but you know, fair is fair, and we need to not, I mean, it's our children, and I think we need to use the opportunity on the budget to talk about the children and not lose on that issue like I think we did on the school lunch issue. And we failed to talk about the children enough, and I just think we absolutely have an opportunity there. But it'll be interesting to see if this leads into kind of a more general debate about the role of government, because I think most people want to see the role of government scaled back, and they want to see things a little more effective.
Diane, I'm looking for you for a lot of substance because you're the only one who worked on a budget committee amongst our group. So what are your comments on the budget?
Well, I think when you said earlier that a budget reflects the priorities of its people, I think that that is absolutely true. And I think that the budget that the Republicans have proposed certainly reflects their priorities. And their priorities seem to be, according to their budget, largest cuts in Medicare in history, largest cuts in education in history, raising the taxes on the working poor, people who earn $28,000 or less for a family of four, who get a tax break, who work, raising taxes on them. And what for? To what end? Well, as Newt Gingrich says, the crown jewel is the tax cut. And this tax cut is targeted at the wealthy. There's no other way. I mean, that is just absolutely the fact. In the Republican tax cut, the top 1% of wage earners in this country, the wealthiest 1%, would get a $20,000 tax cut. I think that Democrats feel basically this is not fair, this is not good budgeting. These are not the appropriate priorities for this country. And yes, we believe in deficit reduction. We've had $600 billion in deficit reduction over the last 2 years, led by President Clinton without the help of any Republicans. So, you know, let's keep moving in that direction. But let's do it fairly, and let's not do this Robin Hood in reverse tax cut that benefits the wealthy at the expense of the middle class and working people.
Anne, I know you'll want to respond.
Oh, yes. Diane, since you're outnumbered, I really want to go gently because I feel badly about that. But Diane, I don't know what budget you're talking about. Didn't bear any, or what tax cut you're talking about, because it doesn't bear resemblance to what Republicans are proposing. If you're talking about a $500 per child tax credit, that's hardly targeted, and you have to make under a certain amount. That's hardly targeted to the wealthy, and that does help the working poor as well if they have children. Frankly, you know, again, the class warfare argument of Republicans are only for tax cuts for the wealthy, it doesn't hold water if you look at where the tax cuts are targeted. Even the capital gains tax cut is going to help really the middle class more than anybody else. I mean, people over at the White House need to take a look at who actually benefits from capital gains. It is not just the wealthy. It is a wide array, and especially the middle class. The majority of the benefit goes to the middle class. But this constantly saying that we're balancing also on Medicare, we're balancing Medicare on the backs of the poor and this and that. Medicare and the steps being taken in Medicare reform have to happen whether there's a tax cut or not. It is not a matter of making the reforms to Medicare to be able to afford a tax cut. They have to happen regardless. Republicans cut additional programs in order to justify a tax cut. So again, the whole comparison to Medicare is totally spurious as well. I think what you have to say is, yes, President Clinton in the first 2 years did show some courage in helping cut the rate of increase in the budget. He did actually propose budgets that would cut the rate of increase in the deficit. Ronald Reagan tried to do that, and he did in 1981 propose those kind of heavy budget cuts, and you would have thought that he was taking poor people and young people out in the streets and publicly flogging them and beating them and throwing them into the poorhouse when he tried to do it. When Clinton did it, he was hailed as a conquering hero, and that's great. And that, you know, we were at a point, I guess, when everybody was ready to accept the budget had to be balanced. Unfortunately, this year, he chose to be missing in action, and the budget that he originally proposed, and Christine, he already proposed a budget, had no deficit reduction at all. It was basically deficit neutral, if not a deficit increase, and basically sat back and said, okay, Republicans, you guys say you want a balanced budget amendment, you say you want to balance the budget, you do it. They did it, and again, you would have thought Republicans were taking poor people and young people and children out in the streets and were going to publicly flog them and flail them and kill them and all the most horrible things you can think of. But Republicans understand something very basic, and that is when money is put through the government, it is less efficiently spent. In fact, economists that retired from the Federal Reserve Board did a study over the government. They came up with something called the bureaucratic rule of two. And that is, if it costs 50 cents in the private sector to do it, it will cost $1 when government does it. So we understand the more you can take it out of the hands of the government and put it back into the private sector for different services to be provided, the more you can contract out, the more you can send the money back down to the local area to be spent, the more likely you'll have a more efficient spending of the money. And it isn't necessarily, and we should stop playing the game of trying to impugn people's motives of spending money. Republicans don't want to throw people in the street. Republicans don't want to stop educating people. Republicans don't want the senior citizens to suffer. We just see a different role of government in affecting the same kind of outcome, and we see a different role of money in affecting the same kind of outcome. So let's stop the name-calling. Let's start working together for a budget that's going to help the country.
Kellyanne, you worked not only on the Contract with America, but you were associated with Jack Kemp and supply-side stuff. So how do you feel about this budget and what it means?
This budget, the Republican budget that's currently on the table, reminds me of something that I realized about 5 years ago in my personal life, which is adult life is all about priorities and tough decisions. And Congress, I think, has masqueraded for a long time. The federal government has masqueraded for a long time as tough decision makers working for the people, when in fact the out-of-control spending is recognized by the American people as being a slap, if not a sucker punch in the face to them. And so at last we have, I think, a lot of the components that were talked about in the 80s and to a large extent were implemented in the 80s come to the legislative body, start making real courageous cuts. It's about political courage. It's also about moral courage as well, because many people think it is absolutely imperative to cut some of these programs, and I don't mind using the word cut, because people, I think, out there are smart enough to realize that if you're going to engage in class warfare, if you're going to engage in immediate test of is it a cut, is it an increase in spending, is it this, is it that, this is what they want done. They know that certain programs aren't going to be abolished. They just want them streamlined. And if that's what it takes, that's what they're looking for. This budget is very future-looking, which I think sets it apart from other economic agenda that have been proposed in the past. It's very future-looking. It does look at our children, and it doesn't shaft the seniors, by the way, in the meantime. President Clinton didn't just sit back when this budget was being talked about. He sat back when a very important document was released over a year ago called the Trustees Report, and it dealt with Medicare. And I think the American people are starting to realize the Trustees Commission featured 5 individuals, perhaps 6, but 3 of whom are Clinton cabinet appointees. 3 Clinton cabinet members, a Republican from the private sector and a Democrat from the private sector, and they unequivocally, unanimously found that if something is not done about Medicare now, it will go bankrupt. That's it, in the year 2002. And under law, when it goes bankrupt, it's over, folks. You don't steal from Peter and give to Paul, Paul being Medicare, unless you pass other legislation. President Clinton chose to ignore that, and now you hear about not just class warfare, but seniors versus children versus middle class warfare. And it's really not effective, because I think the American people are smarter than that to believe everything that they hear. President Clinton needs to get involved with the budget battle, because I think there's a fundamental point being missed here. Americans care much more about what's going on with this budget now than they do who occupies the Oval Office in 1996. They care much more about pocketbook issues than they care about who's going to be in the Oval Office. And there's time to get involved, show, I think, executive leadership as well as legislative initiative to bind together, as Ann has said, and work for all people. There's a revolution afoot here, and it's very responsive. It's not an overhaul, but it's a revolution because it's fundamental, and it's meaningful, and it's real. This isn't the time to run for office. It's real. This is implementation time. And the revolution features a couple of things. Among them, cuts in spending. That's what people are clamoring for. But that doesn't mean that they don't want tax cuts either. And Newt Gingrich saying that the tax cut provision of the contract was its crown jewel was right on. It's like a 5-carat diamond to most Americans because they like tax cuts. The flat tax is so popular now, and it's 17% for everyone. I hear about it everywhere. Everyone loves it. It's 17% for everyone, including the, quote, wealthy, whoever they are at this point. And people like the flat tax. They don't mind the fact that wealthy people, as the media deems them or as we deem them, will pay the same rate in income tax as everyone else.
Kim?
Well, I'm going to get back to the discipline question. I mean, I think our government's become this great obese body and we're sucking down slim fast pork shakes. I mean, nobody's really getting the fact that you need to kick back and say, it's going to take sweat. I need discipline to say, yeah, we do have to attack Medicare. I mean, Newt Gingrich is our personal trainer. He's standing there saying, you know what? We're not going to get any slimmer. We're not going to get any more healthy if we don't start looking at tough decisions and working hard at them. There are, you know, the Medicare decision, it can't be easy. It can't be an easy decision. The welfare decision, the education decisions, they can't be easy. But the fact of the matter is, year after year, budget after budget, they've exploded, and they're out of control. When you have a welfare system that doesn't let families stay together, that discourages people from working, or that doesn't say a job is better than selling drugs, when you have a Medicare system that includes incredible amounts of fraud, that scares old people, when you say that you're going to take away their money, you've got to start looking at the fact that there's a lot of fat that can be cut. Now, it's, you know, that's become a political thing. Oh, cutting the fat. Excuse me, cutting the fat means taking a little bit here and a little bit there, and that's not really an answer. But I think there's discipline involved in everything. And I think what we've missed on a lot of these programs and a lot of these issues is the reason most people or countries or places become obese is because they've got a moral problem, that they've got an unanswered question in their hearts or their souls, and we are not addressing questions about why people commit crimes. Instead, we put more money in the budget, we put programs like midnight basketball into a budget, and we say that'll take care of it. Why do people commit crimes? They're unhappy, they have problems, they're mentally unstable. We're not answering why people can't be disciplined on a welfare system. Maybe because we've made it a little bit too easy to be on welfare. We got to start talking about tougher questions, answer some of our social questions and our social problems, see what we can do ourselves, come up with some self-discipline, some self-responsibility, and get tough and start working out and maybe not expire in 2002.
In the interest of equal time, this is how we're going to work questions. The audience is going to be asked to address the question to a specific panelist, and we're going to ask for only one panelist to respond, because if each of us up here responded, we'd be here all day and we're under real-time constraints. However, Diana is going to have a chance to comment on each of these questions, because as our sole Democrat on the panel, it seems only fair and equal time for her to get to really have both sides of this. But I think she wanted to make a quick comment first.
I just couldn't resist. We talked, I guess it was Kim who just talked about cutting the fat out of the budget. And, you know, it seems to me when you're trying to cut the fat out of something, if you're trying to lose weight, you don't whack off an arm or a leg. You know, you slim down little by little, and I think that's what President Clinton's budgets have done. We've cut spending gradually, and that's what the president intends to do. The other point I would just make about the crown jewels, there's a lot of talk about crown jewels, but I think the people that are going to benefit from this budget are those that own and wear crown jewels.
To the audience. Oh. There were questions earlier. Yes, sir. If you can wait for the C-SPAN mic to come over, we're going to start our next panel in just a couple of minutes. So I see our panelists are here waiting. But thanks for your patience, and we'll be with you in just a moment. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, I guess I'll direct my question to Ann Stone. You mentioned earlier about the $9,000 that's for each individual student. This is not higher education, this is 1 through 12. Right. I just want to start off, I came from a small rural from western Pennsylvania school, and I graduated with only 110 individuals. We were one of the, we were really strapped for cash in my school district, to the point that 18 of our teachers were furloughed, raising our level of students from 25 to 38 students per class. And that hurt us dramatically because there was a lack of funding, not only from a national level, but say from a state level as well. And that is directly affecting my education and how, when I was brought up in 9th and 10th and 11th grade, because in 12th grade, because I was forced to have less individual learning and help with other professors. And I guess the second part of my question is dealing with the entire panel.
I'm sorry, what was the question there?
Well, I'm getting to it right here.
Oh, okay.
It's more or less, I'm going to get to like what is going to be done with educational funding. But the second part is, okay, I just want to just finish off real quick. How many people here received national funding from, say, a Stafford loan or a Pell Grant when you went to school, a university, state? Okay. I am currently receiving that for a state system for higher education. I go to a state school, and here again, the same problem. It's a state issue, but it's also a national issue. We're not receiving the funds that are available. We're not receiving the money that is necessary. And that, well, that might seem, well, you know, what does the national government have to do with the state government? Because that our tuition dollars are being increased. We're going to have to pay back our student loans when we get out of school quicker, with a higher interest on that. And that's not fair to my generation or to the generations coming afterwards. And I just find that it just seems like that you mentioned that it's not a budget cut with education money for student Stafford loans and Pell Grants and to regular 1 through 12. But it is, if you look at it from the perspective of when you have an amount of money that's allocated to the future for education, and then you cut back from that, that is a cut. And it's hurting my generation.
I'll try to make my answer a little shorter than the question that I think is in there. Bottom line is, what I'm saying is, yes, you have to have funding to a certain level. What I'm saying is we had the highest funding and still nothing was going right in the school system, or very little was going right in the school system. And the point was, there's more to education than money, that money alone doesn't cut it. I'm not saying that you spend no money. That wasn't my point at all. Also, in terms of your point about student loans and interest rates and stuff like that, the budget gets balanced. If we get our fiscal house in order, you're going to see a lot of those things go down. I mean, if we are able to have a balanced budget, interest rates are going to come down. That's a very positive thing that will happen. And also, interestingly enough, Alan Greenspan supposedly in discussion with the senator on the budget committee said that he also felt a tax cut was very necessary to stimulation of the economy, that spending cuts alone would not help the economy. So much for that crown jewel not being important.
No, I'm sorry. Diane?
I would just echo what you said, that you know, people like you are going to be hurt by these budget cuts. The Democrats in the Congress tried to pass an amendment to take the money from the tax cut to the wealthy and restore education funding. The Republicans voted it down. So we're going to keep fighting, and we're going to keep trying to put money back into these important programs. And I just make one final point. If Republicans really want to do something to cut federal spending, what they can do is get the line item veto legislation, which is sitting bottled up in the Congress. It's passed both the House and Senate, but the Republican leadership has not gotten it out of conference. They can get that bill moving and get it to President Clinton, who will sign it, and then we'll have the authority to line by line cut back federal spending.
Last question from the audience, and then we're going to move on to our panel on presidential politics. Yes, sir.
I'd like to ask Ms. Reese, is it? And, are Democrats, do they claim any leadership on the budget issue at all? I think it was 68 Democrats in the House didn't vote for any budget, not the Gephardt budget, not the Black Caucus budget. President's budget went down 99-0 in the Senate, and even President Clinton is backing off his original budget, claiming they're promising to come back with a new one. Is there any leadership there at all, or they've abdicated completely to the Republicans?
Well, obviously, I disagree with the premise of your question. There has been a lot of leadership, and there continues to be. The 99 vote that you refer to was a political ploy, and it was nothing more than that. What is leadership is 2 years of deficit reduction to the tune of $600 billion done by President Clinton and the Democrats in the Congress. Not one Republican voted for any of those budgets. So all that deficit reduction was done thanks to the Democrats. That's a lot of leadership. What is leadership is proposing a health care reform plan that would really attack runaway federal spending. The Republicans, you know, obviously they shelved that. Now all of a sudden the Republicans are saying, oh my gosh, there's a crisis in Medicare. Well, we were saying there was a crisis last year. Where were they? So there has been a lot of leadership. There will continue to be more leadership, and we will continue to debate this, obviously.